Alright, in this video we're going to show how to do these cracks on the tablets like we see in this reference photo here. So we've got our design over here on the left, but we want it to have the cracks. So there's a couple different ways that I'd go about doing this. One of which is to use either the freehand or polyline. I prefer the polyline. And I'm going to zoom in here just to show how this works. And what I would do is I would just come and click and just make a series of clicks that way and then back this way. And then once you get back to the top, you come across to where we started, and it changes the icon to that arrow, which means that we're going to close that in, and then we can fill that in with black, and that's going to give us our first crack. So we can do the same thing. For another crack here, we'll just come down, and I'm just clicking so that it's straight line segments. So every time I click, it's just going to create a straight line segment. And then I'll come across over that way. Now on this one, I'll come in here and come down like this, and come up and across, and connect that. And in order for this to show through, I would take this one, shift select this one, and combine those together, and then fill it in with black. I've got the hotkey of 8 on the keyboard. We'll fill it in with black. If you don't want to go over to here, you can see that black is 8. And it looks like I didn't quite go all the way across, so I just lift this up a little bit, just so that it's going over the same, or going all the way over. So that's one way, is to just make straight line segments. Another one would be to draw freehand. I still use the polyline usually to do that, but I can just draw freehand like this, and then come back in and once again get back to where we started and end, and oops, hit number 8 on the keyboard. I think probably for cracks, the straight line segments look a little bit more natural than a curved segment, so that's probably what I would do, is more straight line segments. So that's one way of doing it. Another way would be to use another tool that's kind of fun, and that would be, so I'm going to use freehand this time instead of polyline, because you only have to do one click instead of double click to end. So I'm just going to click here to there, and I'm starting from the right and coming inwards, and I'll show you why I would do that here in just a little bit. I'm just going to start over here and come in this way, and come in like that. Oops. Undo. Stop, click, and click. So every time I click and then click again, it's going to give me a line segment. Okay, so just to show how this works, I would then take all of those line segments. I can multi-select them by holding down Shift every time I click on each of the line segments. And then, once I've got them all selected, I'll combine them together. That way, whatever I do to one, it does to all of them at the same time. And then I'm going to use something called Distort. So I'll come over here to where it's got the drop shadow and contour, and I'm going to choose Distort. So with Distort, you can choose what's called a zipper distortion, and you can give it an amplitude and a zipper frequency. So the amplitude is how tall up and down it's going to distort, and then the frequency is how often it's going to distort. So I'll just do this a little bit here. So you see what it's doing is making a zipper. I probably don't want it to be quite that tall, so I'll shift this amplitude down a little bit, and then I also want it to look random, so I would randomize my distortion. And then there's other options here too. Smooth it out. I don't want to smooth it because I want to do the straight line segment look, and I'm not quite sure what the local distortion thing is. I'd have to play with that a little bit, but anyway, so we can get a distortion to it. Like I said, more amplitude, the more it's I'm not going to do local. So the more the amplitude, the more it goes up and down. So now that I've got it distorted so that they look like cracks, what I can do is apply artistic media to that so that it gives it the thickness that I want. So I come over to Artistic Media tool and select a style of line. Because it's a crack, I want it to be wider at one end and thinner at the other, so you just select one of these, and all of a sudden it then applies that effect to the crack. Now the reason that I started over here from the right to the left and then from the left to the right going inward is because it takes into account the direction of the line. So had I started this way from here and went to the outside, if I did that and then applied my artistic media to it, you'll see how it goes the wrong way. It's okay, even if I had done that before, you can select it with the shape tool and just come up here and say reverse direction, and then it would reverse it. So that's okay if you didn't do it ahead of time, you can always switch it. But since I knew that would be an issue, I went ahead and did that. With artistic media, so if we go to wireframe, I'll click on this just so that I can make sure I'm clicking on the artistic media, not the center line. You have the option for your stroke width, so if I go up with my width, you'll see that my cracks get thicker or thinner. And this is an effect being applied to the that center line, so it's still editable. Just go up to Object and say Break Artistic Media Group Apart. So what that does is it breaks those center lines apart from the artistic media, so I can actually delete those. I don't need them anymore, and then I can come and edit these to get them to go where I want them to go. Another fun tool that you can use is called Smear. So I could take Smear and make this a little bit bigger, and so this line, if I wanted it to go a little bit of a different direction, I can click and drag, and you see as I drag it, then it just keeps cracking all the way. You can also make it really small and come in here and pull out another section. Just kind of click and drag, and it pulls that crack out. I don't know that it works or looks the best for cracks because I think it's once again too curvy. But I guess what we could do is start with curves, and then we could select everything and switch it to line segments, and then it's going to look more liney. So that'd be cool too. That's another way of doing it. So there's a couple different ways of how I would draw my cracks and get them to work out. The outline that we've got here, if you're getting ready to cut this, what you would do is you would take your outline. I'm not quite sure how you got this drawn up. Okay, so I would take that outline and hit Control-Shift-Q to turn it into a object, or you go up to Object and say Convert Outline to Object, and then you would take your cracks and Shift select your outline and hit W to weld it, and that way we've got our outline welded to our crack, if you're going to do an outline all the way around. But especially like here in the middle, so if we were to build a crack, or if we were to draw a crack that was this whole width here maybe, so we would Shift select the outline and hit W to weld that, and now we've got it. We'll do the same thing here, W to weld that. So once it's welded, then we've got that crack going all the way through. I just drew this freehand really quick, so once again I could select all those and switch them to line segments so that it's more like select lines. Oops, I guess I shouldn't do this. Holding down Control, I can deselect these nodes so that I don't change those segments. And alright, so I've got all those, so now I'll change those to line. I'm actually going to back up on this a little bit, so I'm just going to undo a couple of steps until we get back to our original lines here. And that's because, so if this is our overall stone size, 49 by 109, and we want this to be able to stay within that stone size, I don't know if this is actual size or not, but assuming that it is, if we wanted these tablets to have the outline actually fit within the stone, I'm going to need to shrink that a little bit. So I just held down Shift and stretched it along this edge to bring that in a little bit. I'll do the same thing. So if I do Shift, what it does is it brings it in equally on in both directions. So it's coming in both ways. So that way I know that it's going to fit, and same thing top to bottom. I can bring that in. Well, I guess I don't need to hold Shift because it's not all the way down to the bottom of the stone, so I'll just drag that down a little bit. Maybe that's a bit too far. Well, that's just assuming that that this rectangle is your overall shape size. So, oops. Do that again, Shift and bring it up. That way it doesn't run into our text. So once we've got that done, then we can do Object, Convert Outline to Object, and it would give us that the double line instead of just the single line. And then we can re-weld all of these. We'll have to Shift select them all. And the last thing that you select in your Shift select becomes your target, so then we'll weld those. I usually just hit W on the keyboard. Oops, and I forgot to look and make sure that those stay there. As long as they stay within the totally within this line, then when it welds, it will weld correctly. So if it's coming outside of that line, then you want to move it a little bit. So you just want to make sure that this and this completely come within that area there. So we just move our way around and make sure that our pieces are completely within. So that way when we Shift select this to weld it, then we don't get any jagged edges on the opposite side. And these ones I have to do separately because they weren't combined with those ones. I had done those that different way. Another thing to show you is, so sometimes when you combine things, the fill winding gets messed up, so sometimes you have to actually select one of these nodes and reverse the direction so that it fills correctly. Come on. Reverse direction. There we go. And then another thing that before, when we created these, we combine them all together first. If you don't combine them all together first, then what ends up happening is you have to apply your artistic media to each piece separately. So you'd select that one and then apply your artistic media to it. I haven't done my distortion yet either, but just to show you that if you don't combine them, then you have to do this for each individual piece. And then when it comes to breaking the pieces apart, you can go up to Object and say break apart, but then you have to go and delete the center lines individually as well. Oops. So if you combine them ahead of time, then it's easier to delete them all, and it's also easier just to make them all to begin with. So that's why I do my combine, and that's why I would bring in those edges. And yeah, that should be just about it.